just to warn you that we are videoing this for the website. If anybody doesn't want to appear on our website for any reason, just in case the camera happens to cast across the audience, if you could let us know at the end of this session so that we can wipe you off the document. But I think the camera will be mostly playing on the panel, obviously, tonight. But if you were to ask a question, then we might move towards you. So I'd like to say a big thank you and a welcome here to Gallery North. I'm Helen Baker, I'm director of the gallery, and we're delighted to host this exhibition, Graphite, and particularly grateful to the artists involved in the exhibition, the curators, for coming along and giving their time freely, I have to say, for this artist question time panel. And also we'd like to thank particularly Cordelia Underhill, who has come down from Scotland, from Dundee? Yes. Yes. I'll ask people to introduce themselves very quickly at the beginning, just so you know who they are. Yes, we're delighted to have both you and the panel here tonight. So I'm going to chair this discussion, and maybe if we could start by introducing ourselves. It's not too nerve-wracking.
I can do that. Alice Woodhouse. Yeah, I work with Joe. I'm Cordelia Underhill.
I'm Joe Woodhouse, and I work with Alice there. And I also put this show together with Michael there. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. So.
I'm Jane. I'm Richard Lancaster.
And I'm Michael Mulvihill, also the show together.
Okay. And I thought it would be nice because it is a show that is being curated by two of the artists, to talk a little bit about that, because I do think that when artists put shows together, exhibitions together, they very often do it in a way that is indicative of their approach to practice. And so I felt it would be good to open this discussion with maybe Michael and Joseph talking a little bit about that, remembering that we've only got an hour. So, yeah. So if you'd like to start, Michael.
Well, it all happened quite a long time ago. So I think the start of the show was just a very simple notion in that we both drew with made pencil drawings really in short. And we kind of just thought it would be interesting to hang work together. And this is about 2 years ago, I think, in the Way Good project space. And it kind of become quite apparent when the work was coming together that there was kind of quite strong formal relationship within the drawings. And also they seem to be speaking about something very specific, I think.
We weren't quite sure what it was at that stage, actually, and I think part of the process of curating the show was an attempt to explore that, actually.
I think we wanted to investigate it, and one of the ways we kind of said it would, when we said, how does this extend out into other artist practices? So, and that was kind of formed the question that we had when, in curating the piece and in selecting the artists for the exhibition.
And am I right in thinking that Via Selman's was a kind of locus for the ideas, in a sense?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think our own works and the conversation between them was more of a locus, really, than a particular artist. And it's like kind of any artist research, it's more reflective. It's kind of really interesting. I work with students a lot. When you tell them to do artist research, and it's kind of reflecting on what's interesting about it for yourself. And we picked a lot of artists that we were really like the work, and then kind of whittled it down according to what they were offering to the show. But Via Selman's was really important, and particularly a piece of writing that Michael had picked up on, where she was interviewed by Chuck Close, and I'm sure a lot of people have probably read the interview. It's quite a seminal interview, but and it's in the V.S. Elman's Biden book, I think, isn't it? Or it's reproduced there, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the V.S. Elman's interview was kind of really informative, and maybe he's kind of hinted at what was kind of common to our works, and maybe something that could be explored in this show, although it obviously shifts and changes as we put it together.
I think what was really quite interesting about the interview, if you get a chance to read it, is it's kind of very informal tone in that it is very much two arts practitioners talking about both their own practice rather than somebody maybe with a theory background talking to an art practitioner.
I think this is something that has come through in the publication, and also has come through, I imagine, for the artists themselves when they were approached, and the way that the exhibition's been put together and the interviews. Could you talk a little bit about your experience of that, Rachel?
I found it quite helpful actually, because it's something that weirdly I've never really done before, like an interview that's going to be transcribed.
Yeah.
But I think the way that it was done, you kind of got, it was being recorded, so it wasn't too sort of nerve-wracking. But I think it's quite good because sometimes it's only by saying things out loud you realise actually what it is that you really think.
Yeah.
It sort of makes you articulate things that you kind of have going wrong but you don't maybe acknowledge.
And it being in the studio was quite important, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's just where you feel comfortable as well, so you sort of feel a bit more relaxed, so you're maybe a bit more honest about, about what you're doing.
What about you, Jen?
Yeah, I found the interview quite... Being in the studio was very good, because usually you're in situations like this and everything's very tense, but you're in the studio and we had mince pies, tea, and it was a very informal chat.
Very difficult to hear, the sound is coming back.
Yeah, there was something very informal about it being in the studio, and I think when it's informal, it's not that you forgot you were being recorded, because I never did. But what comes to your mind is very much prompted by what's around you. And so we were talking directly about the work, and about tools, and about the setup, and how it was made. So it focused it very much on practice and on the material, rather than how it relates or extends out into theory.
Yeah. And Peter hasn't come tonight, but Peter talked a little bit about that, didn't he?
I think a lot of the rationale for how the show evolved is included in the interviews. Obviously, we went along to interview the artists largely to kind of select the work. I think that's fair to say. They might have initially and foolishly didn't record the conversations we had the first time round. And came away from each time from the art studios thinking this is really fascinating as a practitioner. And again, maybe thought back to that V.S. Elman's interview, close perhaps, but it was really, I mean, what was interesting about Peter's, for example, is came away thinking, God, how peculiar people's practices are actually, and not in a sort of odd way, but just how distinctive they are. And obviously you try and put a show together of a range of artists and make connections between them, but really it was kind of maybe to examine the process. We had to kind of include those peculiarities, and the best place to do that was in the studio, and it was a really learning experience to go in and see the source material of various artists, and to see the preparatories, James' studio, for example.
I think also, I mean, as an artist, it was kind of a very interesting experience to go and see how other people make the artwork, because myself, I have your own very distinct way of working, and I'm quite aware of it, and then you enter somebody else's space, and it's like your practice has been completely rearranged. Even though you're still producing at the end of it a drawing, a work on paper, it's kind of how that's approached.
You described yours as you wanted your practice to be almost like a habit, didn't you? Which interested me.
Yeah.
And I think everybody had their own particular way of negotiating and themselves within the studio.
And I think it gives artists a really good opportunity, because once you're out of university, you don't get a lot of opportunities to talk to other artists about your practice, and kind of, I know that sometimes it can open you up and you can feel quite vulnerable to the interpretation of what you say. Yeah, I think it's really good, because I think making art in a way is a conversational practice, and the way that you're influenced by lots of different
Do you want to talk a little bit about your practice in terms of Joe, because you collaborate, don't you? So it's a very
similar,
odd practice in a sense.
Well, they're all peculiar though, aren't they? They're all distinct.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a similar thing. It's about art being I mean, I think everyone, it's not collaboration, but I think everyone is influenced by art out there, and therefore it's kind of like a dialogue anyway. But we work in a similar way to that, is that most of our discussion happens through the artwork.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because yes, I think that there are communities in art, aren't there? And this exhibition is quite interesting, as much as all the artists have this connection with the Northeast, and yet it is a very, you don't think about that when you look at the exhibition that they're in, but there is nevertheless a community there, as a shadowing effect.
And I think drawing's a really interesting area, because unlike painting, that perhaps you have more dialogue with the history of painting, then drawing is like film or photography. It's something that people do outside of art. So you're taking on different references there.
Now, Cordelia, you wrote an essay for the publication, and one of the things I know you're interested in is scale, and you hadn't seen the exhibition actually when you gave us the essay.
Earlier today, I did some research into the work of the artists here, but I didn't see these particular works.
So I'm quite interested to hear how you feel, having written an essay about drawing, and then you come into this exhibition.
I mean, it's interesting. This for me is there's a drawing, an exhibition quite similar actually going on right now at the Centre for New York, called Drawn from Photography. So it seems to me to represent a little bit of a trend almost. The presence of drawing has really changed to how it was 20 years ago. It has a very different kind of presence. I would say it's kind of increased in scale. I mean, it draws a huge amount of curatorial attention and a lot of theoretical attention also. And this sort of partly comes from the practice of drawing, which kind of took away problems of figure ground when the minimalists and artists working after the minimalists took drawing off the wall, as it were, and brought bridges between sculpture and painting. Suddenly installation and all sorts of other things were defined as drawing. So we no longer understand drawing necessarily as a mark on a piece of paper. It can be described as anything, performs any kind of medium or technique, or time-based thing. And with it sort of developed this theoretical narrative where it's almost come to exceed itself in some way. And drawing has almost become its own subject. And more recently we see this kind of thing where there's almost like a kind of deadpan response to this kind of theoretical overload, which is just like, let's just get back to pencil and paper.
It's interesting you say that, yes. I think that there is certainly a kind of duality to a lot of the work, which is in one sense quite light touch, in another sense quite heavy, depending on how you want to approach it. Do you want to say something about that, Joe?
Not really. I mean, I think Cordelia raises loads of points in her writing, and I was particularly interested in some of the areas in there. I think, and it has received a lot of attention. I think you were quite rightly pointed out that a lot of those were in quite generalistic terms, and I think what we tried to do, rather than a survey show of drawing, was to try and identify specifics and commonalities initially between myself and Michael's work, but I guess also with threads running through this, that doesn't contradict the fact that we're trying to allow each artist a bit of space in identifying the peculiarities in practice, but we were trying to really look at reconciling conceptual approaches to a very process-orientated way of working, and I was really particularly interested in what Cordelia was saying about that kind of expanded field of drawing and the kind of notion of how our interpretation of what drawing offered had really altered recently. So I particularly thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just to pick up on that mention in minimalism as well, in that kind of feel with the show that, you know, I suppose, especially with Louise Hopkins, that these references to minimalism are picked up. And I think also in terms of the artists, I think, Rachel, you were saying about you approach your paintings as just having just enough within the work, in that there wasn't anything more to put into the drawings that was, you know, there wasn't I don't know, more meaning or more work put into them, you know, they weren't over-egged.
Yeah.
And that, so, you know, so I think there's sort of some very strong references back in the past to minimalism and conceptual art practices and process-based. And I think I'd just point out that Cordelia had mentioned the on drone show as well, and you know, both Richard Foster's currently in that show and in this show, so there is these curatorial relationships. I think there's the sort of currentness has sort of become apparent around the show rather than being quite deliberate.
We did start curating this about 2 years ago as well, so it was it's good that it's current.
What's your perception of this, Jane? Do you have any?
In terms of like people talk about drawing very specifically, it's almost like people are trying to define it and understand it and sort of find out where it is now and sort of pin it down to what's happening with drawing now. And personally, I find drawing rather than painting, I don't feel the need to do that. My painting practice was very much about the definition of painting that refers only to painting. And I find actually moving into the drawings, I just let that go. I don't mind.
You don't?
It's definition, or it's
a piece of artwork rather than a drawing in itself.
But it's still a drawing itself. But in my mind, I'm not at all thinking about the place of drawing or the history of drawing. It seems I was very bogged down in the history of painting and very determined to keep my work very specific to those materials. With the drawings, personally, it seems a bit of freedom. I don't relate to it the same as I did to painting.
Right. You talk quite a lot about your relationship to painting and drawing in your interview, don't you, Rachel?
Yeah, because I went for quite a few years without really doing that much drawing, to be honest. And then it's just in the last couple of years that I use it as a way to sort of make the imagery more abstract, because I think you're less precious if you've just got a piece of paper and some charcoal, and if you've made like a big stretcher and you've mixed the paint and all that, it's like kind of less, because there's less pressure, you sort of take more risks with it. So I think it becomes more, for me anyway, like it's a way for me to make the images that I use more abstract. Yeah, and I'm a lot more free in my drawings than my paintings, but then as a result my paintings have become looser because I've done more drawing, so it sort of feeds back in.
Yeah.
It might not be the primary concern for a lot of the people here, but I think that if you strip down what a drawing is, that surface and illusion and the kind of expanded field that Cordelia was talking about, I think there's a real commonality there really. And I read this thing recently on contraperception, which someone had written about, Howard Riley had written about in the Tracy website, which anyone interested in drawing should really have a look at the research there. There's quite a lot of research on drawing obviously, but it was that kind of play between drawing as a surface and drawing as the various spaces that offered. And I think just looking around, I mean, I think that's quite apparent in a lot of the work here. But I guess that's, one conceptual conceit for, some of the work, isn't it?
Yeah. I think now because artists can use so many materials, then it has, yeah, as you were saying, kind of reinvented drawing within kind of, you know, making conceptual work. But it still exists as this history of people using it in different fields, or, you know, the sketching, the idea that it's something that's more throwaway or open. I don't think that's something that's necessarily because of the materials that you're working with, but I think that we are drawn to those histories in some way, in this idea of kind of creating two things. So you're working with the history, but you're also trying to kind of subvert it.
Yeah.
I think, which I was trying to talk a little bit about in our.
I mean, that's our work a little bit in a nutshell, isn't it, really? Because one of us makes work where the work operates in a particular way, and then the other one kind of sort of punctures that and upsets it.
Yeah, but I think that's with a lot of artwork is this kind of trying to find something that's real and just kind of twisting it, or creating a space where you can view it in a different way, or you feel like you're viewing it in a new way.
Yeah.
I'm aware of time, and I'm aware that people may want to ask questions. But I did want to ask you to talk a little bit about gesture, because it seems to me that there is a very particular take on gesture in this work that is, if you like, a self-consciousness about gesture that kind of contradicts a lot of what is assumed about drawing, in terms of it being a very, you know, from the self kind of activity. So I wondered if you all wanted to just say something very quickly about that. Yeah.
I think in terms of your drawings, there is an effort to try to distance yourself out as from that kind of expressive gesture. I think I've kind of described it's almost as if I want to achieve in the drawings that the drawings kind of appear through a process of erosion or some kind of of natural erosion in that, you know, it lifts away the hand of the artist from the drawing. So that becomes something that's a lot more objective, I mean, maybe, maybe it's like a museum piece in which it's looked at and